So, I've played Path of Exile 2 for what Steam says is something like 120 hours over the past 11 days or so. Add another 8 or 10 of that on the standalone client for server launch. And that's where we're at. This is going to be some impressions of the game so far. So for context, I've played Path of Exile 1 for about 10,000 hours or so in the past 10, 11 years or so. I don't think about it too hard. I also, and this will be relevant possibly for this impressions, have played at least like 1,000 hours of the Souls games, all the way back in Demon Souls. In fact, my main channel that I never upload to has a Let's Play of Demon Souls, before Dark Souls even came out. So I've been a huge fan of that series for an equal amount of time. I've played all the way up to Elden Ring. That might be relevant for these impressions. Server-wise, alright, let's do a notepad. No, we won't. I was going to debate if I want to do a notepad for this, but yeah, we'll just read it. Alright, so outside of the first 2-3 hours before launch, or during launch, the game has been very stable. There may have been some stuttering in some servers that you log into, but you can just swap to another one, it's generally fine. The first couple of hours, the game had launch issues because they just had so many players logging in that they had to add more servers, and that's easier said than done, so they had issues to deal with. It was so many people logging in that the Steam charts just to see how many people were concurrently playing crashed. Not even Path of Exile. That's how bad it was. I think it got to like 1 million concurrent players or more, which is wild. Alright, let's log in. So I have a level 80 character and some other characters I've been leveling. A level 40 Acolyte of Chiola. And this is relevant because I want to showcase some controls here. One big thing Path of Exile 2 added that PoE 2 does not have is WSD controls, or I guess twin stick aiming if you're using controller. The most important part, of course, is that when you do this you can move around and just spin in circles. That is very important. But also the controls feel really great. I really love the ability to move in one direction and shoot in the other. That is super good. I want to say that point and click can do this too, but it might feel a little awkward because like you're not popping, because like you can't hold down mouse while you're moving and stuff like that. I have yet to test it out, so we'll see. The playtime on this character is 4 days, so over 100 hours or so. Most of my playtime's on this character. Progress-wise, I just finished the Tier 9 map, or am at Tier 9 maps, so a little rough. I guess death count should be important here. 48 times, that's not too bad, right? Right? So let's go to my impressions, other than WSD feels really good, though I wonder if it's too good, because I think people who play with point and click might have some issues with some combat in this game, especially with the shooter archetypes. For instance, crossbow guy here feels really good with the ability to move in one direction and shoot in the other, and I feel like with point and click you'd have to wiggle your mouse all sorts of different directions in ways that might not be as fun. But I think that's a preference thing, and hopefully it's not too egregious for that playstyle. I find the zones in PoE 1 to be very large, maybe too large. And not only that, but the layouts of them feel a little too mazy, and One thing that's in PoE 1 that I'm not sure is in PoE 2, but with time we'll tell if that's the case. They don't feel like they have enough tells for which direction you go into. Like in PoE 1, you might have a large field area, but it'll have a road that leads to the direction where you need to go, with some side paths if you feel like exploring. And you know how to get from point A to point B that way. Or maybe there's a cathedral area, and there's 4 branching paths, but you know which path to go to because there's a waypoint in the middle, and depending on which side the waypoint is placed connected to the center of the room, it'll point to the correct direction, and that's like secret tells, which I like too. Which is why I'm not sure that it's 100% true in this game. There might be secret tells nobody's caught up on yet. But it does feel like a lot of areas are mazy and a little aimless. And to me, I'm not a fan of that, because in a game like this, you're going to be replaying the game many, many times. And if the areas are mazy and don't have any tells, that makes it so you're essentially doing the same aimless playthrough each time, instead of coming up with creative ways to speed route your way through the game. And one thing I felt was really rewarding about Path of Exile 1's campaign, and yes, there's going to be comparisons between 1 and 2, I'm sorry, but I'm not going to try to make the statements of which is better, yada yada. But the one thing I liked in PoE 1's campaign was that you could quicken your playtime from, say, like 30 hours or more to, like 5 or 10, depending on how slow of a pace you went. And it felt really rewarding to see your playtime get cut down that fast, not just through how fast you could kill enemies with your build, but also through knowledge of the layouts. And I thought that was really a nice touch, and I thought the level design was really good for that. And I want that to be true for PoE 2. I'm not sure if it is right now. If it isn't, that feels like a letdown to me. Another thing about the zones is a lot of them are very cramped. Oops, wrong zone for this example. There's a level in the game Diablo 2. Where's my burrow? Oh. There's a level in the game Diablo 2 called the Maggot Lair, and it's notorious for having tiny, tiny corridors where, like, literally maybe 1 or 2 characters can pass through. And this game feels like every few areas is just the Maggot Lair again. Like, this is an incredibly cramped area, as you can see. And we're just gonna one-shot enemies, sure. And, some of these choke points are incredibly tiny, and I'm not sure I'm a fan of that. It's actually especially bad for party play, because this game can have up to 6 players, and there is player collision. And when you have something like that, you can really lead to some problems with players blocking the way. I think the zombies can have player collision, but I'm not sure about that. Like player minions. I don't think so, though. I think I've seen players run through them. But more importantly, I think like in public party play, you could really troll players, and that feels bad. And in group play, you still have that innate frustration of like, I can't get across the bridge and all of that. And getting swarmed in a tight corridor might not feel that great compared to like some open strafing nonsense. So I kind of wish areas were a little bit more open, but it's maybe not the worst culprit. It's not too egregious, but it does feel a little awkward to have so many compressed areas. Act 2 has... the finale area kind of has a really dreaded version of this called the Dreadnought, and I guess that pun was intended. Where there's these tiny bridges you go across, and you can get pincered from either side, and get stuck on a bridge and die. It's mostly your fault doing that, because it's pretty obvious where you can see enemies coming from, and so the answer is to not go on the bridges when enemies are nearby. Easier said than done, but still mostly doable. I think the most egregious example of this kind of level design is the Lost Towers. They have a horrible layout where when you go to one, it's, and I don't have an example here, they have occluded towers, like you can't see what enemies are inside the tower and you have to go into this tiny bridge door. It doesn't block player sight, but it is like an awful layout. So the zones feel more cramped. It's bad for party play. So that's one of my other impressions. Now going through the acts, oh yeah, can I just say the fact that there's like a load screen for these when you shuffle them feels really bad. Like, what is going on here? That needs to be instantaneous, like that to that. Anyways, outside of load screens for the freaking map UI, there's a lot. One cool thing is you can see what bosses give optional rewards, like 10 cold res, or let's see, who gives the skill point? The Crowbell, right? Or the Crowbell giving 2 passive skill points, and so on and so forth, or even more right here from getting the loot. And I want to say in interviews they're going to change and shuffle which enemies give which rewards each season, which if that's the case, that'll be a cool way to keep the playthroughs fresh. Maybe. But the one thing about these optional, so-called optional enemies is they're not really that optional when they give permanent upgrades. It does feel like it's just extending the campaign to me. So I wonder, overall, with the cramped zones, the mazy layouts that take a long time to get through each area, like these areas are huge, and like even so the waypoint to waypoint distance is pretty large. Especially when you're not moving as fast in PoE1. In PoE1 you can move fast, and I'll get to that later. I wonder if the campaign's going to get old fast, and this is coming from somebody who has quite literally leveled in the campaign 100+ times. I am not exaggerating, I have the characters to prove it. And have enjoyed it almost each time. Unless like a season had a bad mechanic or something. Looking at Necropolis, I guess. I don't know. But after those playthroughs, I don't get tired of Path of Exile 1's campaign because it has good layouts, because you can tell where to go, and you can speed up your route, and leveling a character just feels good to see their progression, which is mostly true in PoE1. Like, seeing how powerful your character gets each time is nice. So that still remains, but with good layouts it helps a lot, so I guess my question in this feedback is the level design good enough? And after the honeymoon phase of playing this new game that everybody's been looking forward to for years, will people get tired of the levels? Well, let's go to another topic that's maybe less critical. I think the graphics, the sound, the music, and the visual effects are all superb. That is undeniable. It has higher running specs than PoE1, but honestly I haven't had too many issues, especially once I turned everything to low, which frankly I do in PoE1, because this game doesn't handle monster density that well, because it has too many monsters on screen a lot of the time. But even at my low settings, I think the game looks great, and I was running it on high textures at the start. And yeah, especially the zone design, this layout, or the zone designs, not the layouts, but the zone artwork is so good. The character designs are really inventive, and yeah, I just cannot say enough positive things about how wonderful the atmosphere and the vibe is. The art direction nailed it. So, on another topic, one of the big changes in PoE 2 is the skill gem system. I can't really attest to the first game's skill system as a new player. 10,000 hours in, I'm a bit jaded. But I think PoE's 2 system is probably more intuitive. You just have a menu instead of the linking system on gear, so you don't feel locked into gear that has links but has bad stats, and you come across an item that has better stats but has no links, and players don't know how to wield there were crafting options to change that well enough, and there was gem weightings with the colors of the sockets, yada yada, probably pretty bad. In this, you just have a menu, and you can put gems in with the uncut skill gems, and it works pretty well, I think. One thing I do wish, though, is... Oh, no, I'm ahead of myself, yeah. The skill gems seem more understandable. Okay. Another thing that is fantastic for single player, if this will ever load, is that pausing, so good. It is so good that you can pause in single player. I am very happy with that. Hardcore might have a little bit of issue in that you could, quote-unquote, like, pause in the middle of hard fights in kind of like a tool-assisted style, where you just frame-by-frame pause to kind of get the move set and do correct moves, but I think that's overstated. For instance, if you pause with this menu up, it's going to be hard to see frame by frame what's going on. You'd have to like look at a second monitor, and good luck with that. And also, I think I've heard the super fights at the end of the game, like the pinnacle fights at the end of endgame, you cannot pause during them, so it's a nice compromise there. Now, as far as the skill tree that goes, though, I'm a little bit more critical. I kind of feel like it's too broad in a lot of ways. Now, like, PvE1's tree was extensive and probably more complicated, because this just has the linear nodes, and they all have little flavorful ways that they're shaped, and they all kind of... You don't have to worry about masteries or the cluster jewels near the end. Help, goodness gracious, if you choose to do that. But I'm still concerned about the attributes, the core attributes. You have strength, dexterity, and intelligence, and strength gives flat life. Intelligence gives flat mana, and dexterity gives accuracy, which is only relevant for attack skills. Now, they've said they just don't know what to do with dexterity, so I'm not sure what the deal is there. But yeah, I feel like the lack of life on the tree is probably deserved, but I think it's undermined, because I do like the theory of it, where with less life in the tree, the devs can focus on life being like a baseline for players, so they don't have to feel like new players don't spec into life and suddenly have way more glass cannon playstyle than they ever should compared to players that do spec into the nodes. Like, it's just too powerful of a stat. I feel like this is somewhat undermined, though, with a few factors. One, strength gives life, and it gives a decent source of life. Every point of strength is 2 life. That is actually quite a lot when it adds up, and essentially it becomes the classic issue of other ARPGs, where when you get a choice between the life stat, the mana stat, and the accuracy stat, you pick the life stat each time if you can fit it. And that's another point that is brought up in chat. Energy Shield is wildly powerful, because sure, you don't have increased life sources on the tree, with some minimal exceptions. You have tons of increased Energy Shield options, and you can stack Energy Shield. And Energy Shield's drawback can be mitigated by Chaos Inoculation, which is somewhere like right here. For sure, you don't have life, but you just stack so much Energy Shield, it kind of outweighs itself, especially since you can heal now with Life Flasks with Eternal Youth, which is also kind of wild. So I really think that Energy Shield might be too powerful if it's going to have percent increases. And apparently they're better than PoE1. And I guess that's because you don't get Energy Shield from Intelligence. That is a good point. But nevertheless, the fact that you get so much Energy Shield on the tree, and but you don't get any life increases on the tree, is kind of weird to me. And then there's also mana. Mind over Matter has increased. Mana has increased sources, if I recall correctly. I think there's percent increased mana on the tree. Or maybe there's not. Let me see. Is there increased mana on the tree? Mana regen. Maybe not. Maybe they actually were tame with that. Okay. Well, color me silly then, if that's the case. Good on them for realizing that, though. But ES getting that treatment... Energy Shield getting the increased value treatment seems really wrong to me. Oh, you can't recharge. Life recharges instead of Energy Shield. Oh, yeah. I guess that's a decent trade-off then. But nevertheless, Chaos Inoculate, like Energy Shield seems too powerful, and yeah, I guess you get some increased mana. Mostly mana regen, that's fine. And besides, you can Eldritch Battery, but I don't know if that's great with Mind Over Matter. Anyways, I think Energy Shield's too powerful to justify the lack of life on the skill tree, and it also just incentivizes strength stacking if you are going life, and I don't know if that feels great. So that's my concern about the skill tree, and I think that's an early access thing. And this is a good transition to give the caveat that all this is early access. This is an impressions take, and generally some feedback for the first 10 or so days in. So things will change, balance will shift, and that's all okay and welcome, and I'm looking forward to the future of this game. Right, now that we have that in mind, let's talk about one of the other key differences in PoE 2. There is a dodge roll. People were really excited for this extra layer of mobility in PoE 2, where you could use some evasion or movement mechanism to avoid attacks. I really think the only real thing dodge roll gives is the iframes rather than like the actual mobility. You actually move just as fast as you do it if you just were running around. Like, people have tested it, it's the same speed. There's that slow bit there. So it's really more of an iframe ability. And the thing is, I do like the dodge roll gameplay in PoE 2, but I do have to divide PoE 1 and 2 in my head from comparison here, because I do like the movement skills in PoE 1 a little bit more. PoE 1 really kind of did have avoidance abilities, they didn't have iframes. Like, there was shield charge that was spammable and not on a cooldown like it's in PoE 1. There was tons of blink skills that could leap over gaps, and all we get now is Leap Slam, and I think that has a cooldown or is very, very slow. And while you can specialize in Blink with a support with a persistent buff, a Spirit skill, Blink has like a 3 or 4 second cooldown for just one use. Even if you lower the duration of that cooldown, it still seems like a very long time to just do a teleport, when that was something you could do in PoE 1. Now, there's reason that they got rid of the movement skills. If they added it, it would make the game lose its kind of like tactical nature, but it kind of to me feels like there's some kind of baby being thrown out in this bathwater of zoomy placed. Like, sure, there was zoomy placed on PoE 1, but I kind of feel like there could have been a lot of potential fun in being able to move fast, even if it was like a cost of like a lot of mana or something. Like, maybe like you could literally have it like be 10 times the mana cost for movement skills in PoE 1, and it would probably be a balanced guess there. Like, some kind of movement skill that just lets you move around fast occasionally would just feel nice, especially when in party play. If you have one player with higher move speed boots than another player, or just higher move speed in general, there's no way for them to really catch up. There's no like Quicksilver potions anymore, and no movement skills to teleport. So I really like movement speed skills. I like the speed running and all of that. And sure, you can run into packs of enemies and stuff. I feel like you can dodge roll into packs of enemies in PoE 2, though, and that still feels bad. And you can always leap out in PoE 1, and hey, there was phasing, which I'm glad phasing's not in PoE 2 as well. I don't think it needs to be there, if only because like, it would kind of ruin the whole tactical thing, same as like low movement skills, but it does feel like a missed opportunity to me. I don't see it coming back in PoE 2, these movement skills, but I just would like them. I would be very ecstatic if there was like a good movement skill. Also, I hear like movement skills like Leap Slam kind of can name lock on enemies, and it would feel jank. Like you might have your mouse over here, but because an enemy's hitbox is so large, like their name box is so large that you would leap into them instead of where you're going. I've seen that happen to some players. I'm not sure. And that's kind of jank. There is some jank in this early access. So I like the speed of PoE 1, and I kind of wish there was more of that in PoE 2, but I see why they got rid of it, or changed it drastically, slowed it down. For hot take, but I don't think having fast gameplay doesn't mean it becomes less strategic. I think that depends on the game. You can have tactical gameplay at high speeds, and you can have tactical gameplay at low speeds. This game is like a lower methodical speed gameplay, but I mean, if there was not high-speed tactical games, then fighting games wouldn't exist, for example. And I think PoE 2 could have been a high-speed tactical game. It just isn't. And it's a decently speeded tactical game, so there's still some stuff going on. At least in my first 100 hours of impressions. So, but overall, I do like the dodge roll. I think it's balanced decently. It feels good, especially after the patch where you can squeak through enemies more. I like the dodge roll in this game. In particular, in PoE 1, in PoE 2, it fits well. If it was PoE 1, I would be salty. But that's why I'm glad they're both different games. Alright, so I like the weapon swapping system in theory. In most cases, I like that you can like go to a shield and raise your shield, but also just automatically hit a button to swap to a bow or crossbow and stuff, and that's really cool. There's two issues I have with weapon swapping, though. One is that only having 8 hotbar options by default, not counting the bonus skills from weapons and the Gem and Legionnaire or Unset Rings, does feel a little restrictive. Like, there's so many combo skills with just one weapon set in this game, at least for crossbows, that I feel like trying to fit 2 weapon sets that are different enough would be really difficult for some builds. So I'm actually trying to send only just so I can fit 3 more hotbar skills, and one of them being Shield Charge. And I can't really fit that on my hotbar right now, just because I really find my hotbar to be kind of filled to the brim already, though some of these skills are kind of garbage, but that's okay. So I kind of wonder if maybe just a little bit more gem ability for weapons, like 2 gem sets for 2 weapon swaps, but I think that would be a little excessive, so I don't know where the balance is there, but it does feel a teensy bit restrictive with only 8 skill gems. Only 8 skills to pick from for 2 weapon sets. Now, that's subjective. What I find more egregiously bad is figuring out how to weapon set allocate, which is a cool feature to be able to have 2 different weapon trees. Like, this is really neat. But oh boy, is allocating these skills incredibly jank. I took forever to figure out how to assign skill points differently. And also, when you assign a skill point in one direction, with the weapon set, you can't assign the other one, you can't have any overlap, and that feels bad. I don't like that because I have this green bar here, I can't put the red bar in, and it's like silly, and I don't like it. In other words, the UI, much in grinding gear fashion, which isn't true. Like, sometimes they have okay UI, but in this case, it is very jank and needs some to clean up. This iteration of it is rough around the edges, to say the least. So, weapon swapping, I feel like there could be a little bit more hotbar for it, but it's generally a really cool feature. Weapon swap system for trees is really cool in function, or in form, but in practice, like, it's super jank to assign points. So this needs to be touched up, the point assignment. No, really only the point assignment's the bad part. Alright. Like, it could be made a lot more clear with weapon sets, and I really don't like its current implementation, yada yada. Now, another topic. Boss fights. The boss fights in this game rule. I really like almost all of them, with the exception of the Forge boss in the Molten Vault in Act 3, if it'll show. I think I have to go to Act 3 Cruel. There is a zone called the Molten Vault, and the boss there is the only boss in the game that is a guaranteed gear check. If you do not have enough damage with your weapons and setup, you will lose this fight. There's just no way around it, and I hate that. Every other fight in the game could be done with skill. Even if it was really hard to do with low damage, you could still win it. The Molten Vault is the most boring timer of all. I hate this boss. Please fix. Otherwise, it's a good fight, except for the DPS check. Like, the fight's okay, the DPS check ruins it. It is totally against everything else I've enjoyed about the game. So, no, the DPS is bad. The DPS check is so bad here. I did end up beating it without having to reload the area. Some players had to come back later, which feels totally inappropriate. And I had to actually respec my build to get more damage and get damage that wasn't fire, because he's of course resistant to fire. So hey, if this boss is not only a DPS check but a imbalanced DPS check, because some builds might do too much fire damage and yada yada. I really hate this boss. But everything else, all the other bosses had a great time. Maybe that bird boss in Ultimatum's too much and stuff, but all the bosses in the campaign that aren't like the trials or whatever feel great to fight. The Act bosses were a huge highlight. Well, the Act 3 final boss could be a little harder, especially when before that you fight the Viper Natsui fight right before Doriani is so much harder than Doriani is, and I really feel like Doriani could have been a harder fight. But oh boy, the spectacle of the first two Act boss fights were great, and there's so much good stuff there. Oh, and I will say there's a lot of bugs with the Colossus in Act 2 and Titan's Valley, or whatever it's called, the Titan Grotto here. Where is it? Yeah. Zalmorath, the Colossus, has bugs, so I hope that's fixed eventually. It is super jank. But good fight, just buggy. Alright. Now there is one thing about bosses, though. They are probably the closest thing to like the Souls analog that I foreshadowed or at the start of this little impression rant. I feel like if you're not a tactical, rolly, combat Twitch reflex, i.e. a Souls enjoyer gamer in some format, Path of Exile 2 might not be for you, and I think that's fine in general, but I do wonder if there's like enough of a fan base that doesn't like Souls game combat to be a little peeved that PoE 2 is diverting from PoE 1 in that regard. I think it's fine, but it is a warning, less than feedback, to people that may not like Souls games, that PoE 2 might be a rough sell, and I would wait till it's free if you haven't bought it yet. For the early access key, I'd wait till the 1.0 launch to test and see if you like it, rather than find out $30 later that you don't like Souls games. So that's not really a criticism, it's more of a subjective observation. I like it, I love Souls games, and I love Path of Exile, for different reasons, but PoE 2 kind of marries the two. Though there is one thing about Souls games, they are a little bit more stressful in a lot of ways than PoE is, and that is a nice segue for a problem I have. So the boss fights are great, they make for tense moments, but I do feel like with the increased difficulty, and there is increased difficulty in PoE 2, don't let anybody tell you otherwise, Mapping is a bit stressful for me. Mapping is like the end game where you grind most of your hours in, or at least in theory it is. My issue with mapping right now is I feel a little too on my toes for every map than I want to be. I don't feel like I can zone out like I could in PoE 1, which was a pretty good appeal draw. And this might be coming as a PoE 1 player to PoE 2. Maybe newer players to PoE 2 will be able to zone out just fine. But for me, I feel like I feel too on edge on every single map, and it's really draining rather than like gets me into a flow state for mapping. And I feel like I have to avoid getting insta-killed more than I'd like. It's a little too stressful. Losing maps on death stops the flow state, but I appreciate it in kind of in principle that like, hey, you can't redo a map too much. I'm glad about that, but it does kind of stop the flow state a little bit. Also, I touched on this before, but the Lost Towers, for how frequent they are and how kind of mandatory they are, this layout is awful. Please just like either make it just like one room where you like the tower, or like a better layout. The layout in this is so bad. It's bad enough and unrewarding enough that I literally just put the lowest tier of Waystone in just to run these because they don't do anything. Their layouts are bad. Just, no. The Lost Towers need fixing. The other thing is that this ties into what I said about layouts before, but the maps may have worse layouts and worse exploration incentives than the campaign. Having to clear all the rares and boss in a map, if there is a boss, when the maps are so mazy and kind of aimless, doesn't feel that great. In PoE 1, maps had very distinct layouts, like you might have a circle with a circle inside it, and you could, like Mesa, or you might have a line that bended around like Strand, or you might have like plateau pancake layers like Shore. Like there's different flavors of layouts, and I thought that was really cool. And they don't do that as much in PoE 2 so far. They all feel like the same kind of like giant blob of a circle or square with a bunch of little patchy mazes in the middle. There's not really any rhyme or reason I found to layouts yet. Or maybe they're just too extensive and complicated and large. And in PoE 1, you just headed to the boss to kill it, and you killed monsters along the way. In this, you kind of just have to wander and find all the bosses, and all the rares, specifically, and if you miss a rare, like at the start of their level, you have to backtrack all the way, and it feels really awful. So I think the layouts need work in mapping, even more so than the campaign. So I don't like the layouts in mapping if we're going to keep the kill all rares objectives. Which I think is theoretically fine, but I think either like the rares should guarantee show up on the map at the start, or the layouts need to be better, or both. I don't like the current just go in blind and get lost too long kind of thing. Especially since I feel like I would have a hard time memorizing any of these layouts, because is there any layout to memorize? I don't know. Well, anyways, let's talk about crafting. I think crafting is a divisive topic, maybe, because PoE1 players are so spoiled by the rich crafting system that's way too complicated for new players. Personally, I actually like the current crafting system enough. I like that it's straightforward. I like that you're incentivized to find bases on the ground, because it's really hard to reverse a base. There's no scouring or alteration orbs, and I think that's really important. It makes it so you're on the lookout for item bases pretty much all the time, and I like finding items on the ground that are important for my build, even if they don't end up being good just as a straight up drop, but like you can say, ooh, this is a ring I need, and I can upgrade it. I can transmute and augment, or if it's a white base, that's even better because I can essence it, and so on and so forth. Ignore the amount of tabs I have. I've spent too much money on PoE1, and I'm very glad they carried over the MTXs. And then like you can Chaos Orb a few times if you have a really good rare, but it doesn't reroll the whole item and mess it up, and so on and so forth. I really like the current system. I think it so far I think the drops for crafting materials, I'm not sure if enough of it drops, but I'm also not sure if it drops too much already. I've noticed in mid-tier maps I'm getting enough of these items. I think it's actually kind of in a good spot right now, but I'm not sure. I think this is a time will tell how the drop rate feels. I don't know for sure. I feel like Blacksmith Whetstones don't drop enough. Even with superior items on the ground, maybe they could a little bit more, but it's whatever. Especially when you get Artificer's Orbs much more commonly from socketed gear. Also, can I just say, I'm not a fan... If there's one thing I'm not a fan of, it is the 3-4 different types of vendors you have to talk to sort items out. If you have socketed items, you have to go to the salvage bench. And if you have... if you want to do a 3-to-1, you have to do a reforging bench. And if you do that 3-to-1 recipe, it has a little animation time, a very short one, but one nonetheless. And then if you want to turn items into crafting shards, you have to talk to the disenchanter. And then if you want to just sell items, you have to sell them differently. And in PoE1, you just literally sold them to one vendor and you got everything done. And it's flavorful, there's some friction, sure, but it feels like maybe there could be a little bit more streamlining of all these benches. To me, at least, it's a little tedious, and especially for a flow state game, I kind of feel like there's too much like managing players. For all the other quality of life in this game, the NPC shuffle is a little too much in going in between maps. Or when you go on the vendor line. And it's not like it adds decision-making too much. Like, sure, there's decision-making of if you sell an item or disenchanted item. I like that, but, like, I feel like something like where if you disenchanted an item, it could do the same as the salvage bench. Like, maybe you upgrade the disenchanter with the hammer or something. You don't have to go to the salvage bench and a disenchanter to salvage them. Like, is that really an extra layer of decision-making we need? Maybe it is, but it does feel like an extra step most of the time. So that's my issue with crafting a little bit. But I think crafting is kind of in a good state, especially at the start of the game. Its core foundation is fine. I like it. That's subjective, of course, but I think it's fine. Maybe more currency drops for, like, Exalt and Regal crafting, but it's actually gotten pretty good with the latest patch. I think it's fine. Now, the thing that I think is really jank, but ultimately doesn't matter, and I'll get to why, is class balance seems wildly off, and skill balance. There's some ascendancies that just are performing vastly worse than others, from what I gathered. I don't really have great first-hand knowledge of this. I've only leveled... the other character I leveled most is a monk halfway through the Axe, or like at the end of Act 3. They're like level 40. And they're the Acolyte of Triula. And they feel fine. They actually feel like they do more damage than this mercenary. So I don't really have much point of reference directly, but from everything I've heard, even from like the PoE 2 player only fans, and well, not only fans, but the ones who play PoE 2 but not play PoE 1, but mostly everybody, that they seem to have wildly different experiences on this game based on what class they picked, and that makes me think the balance is all over the place. The reason this doesn't really matter, though, other than feedback-wise, is that's stuff that's most likely going to be ironed out more than anything in early access. Like, my crossbow guy in the latest update might get some extra buffs, apparently. It's same with bone skills for the witch, and like everybody's giving feedback, and the devs can balance it out better, and they even have metrics for which class is performing the best, and they can see which skills are too overpowered, that they would ruin the game if they ever stayed in, yada yada. There is the drama of if you went into a build that was OP and didn't know it, you might get nerfed and your build is bricked because the refund points are too expensive, but they're lowering the prices of refund points for the endgame, and frankly, and they're trying not to brick builds with nerfs, and so far I think they've mostly been okay with it. It's only been 10 days in, and balance takes a while anyways, like character balance. Like, I think even 10 years into PoE 1, the balance isn't entirely great, and that took a lot of ironing out. And some of those changes were just to shake the meta up in PoE 1, but frankly, like, balancing is a while. And yeah, as pointed out in chat, that we have holidays coming up as of this video, so there's not going to be too many balance patches coming in after the one coming in soon. But point being, the balance is all over the place currently, but it doesn't matter if you're playing this for the long run, because PoE 2 is early access, and that's the most early access you could ever access for a gameplay feature. Balance. Balance is bad, maybe, right now, but that will change. Guaranteed. How it'll change, we'll see. An example that I found funny was that I found killing packs in this game pretty easy, but bosses had like a decent amount of health and were a little challenging in a fun way. And then I heard from another player that the bosses felt way too easy, but clearing packs was way too hard, and they were like playing melee, so it's like that was very interesting to me, that like the playstyles are so different. So, but that's early access issues now. And that's the big thing. Even with 10 years of PoE knowledge and even all the community knowledge from PoE 1, this game has so many different systems, and frankly is so new, and has such a different puzzle to solve, that even with the balance in the early access part of it, there's just stuff to figure out still for all the classes. PoE 1 even had times where people only discovered good build synergies sometimes months or even years down a line, because maybe some tiny thing changed, or maybe somebody just never thought of it. PoE 2 looks complicated enough that there will probably be stuff like that, and it's new enough that there is definitely stuff like that. So I would not trust class balance takes just yet. No. Also, moving the mouse while in WSC is so superior because you can do this. I have to reiterate that. Alright, other stuff. So that's my feedback so far. Overall, I think there's a good portion of early access jank, if you will. Like, there's stuff that's clearly like, this is not fully cooked yet. But the thing that isn't jank is the core of the game. Like, the core combat loop and way and like general itemization, and most of the stuff in the game, like visuals and stuff, everything there is really solid. Like, the stuff that needs changing isn't like deep rooted into the game yet, as far as I've seen. So I think this game has really good fundamentals to change on, and that's probably the best state in early access can be, at least 10 days in. And that's my take. So I've been talking too much, and that'll be the end of the little highlight clip I do for this little impression video that I'm going to upload. And yeah, that's been Trenot, or this has been Trenot, and I'm going to BRB on the stream, but for now, I bid any viewers that watch the vid, adieu.